You spend months helping your son craft the perfect wedding day, stitching tiny blue beads into his bride's veil for luck, folding programs long after everyone else has drifted off to their screens, writing a quiet check that drains the savings you were too embarrassed to call emergency, because that's what mothers do. They give and give and give. Then the photographer gathers everyone in the garden. Roses, grilled meat, champagne bubbles floating in the warm air. Your feet throb in the shoes you bought to match their colors. Your son steps toward you, adjusts his tie, and drops a sentence so casually it nearly knocks the wind from you. Mom, can you step out of the family photos? He gestures for his father's new wife to take your place. For a moment, the world tilts. But the laughter around you never falters, like you're the only one who heard the crack. You who raised this man alone. You who held every broken piece together so he could stand here today. You feel something freeze inside you. Smile forms thin, sharp, unnatural. If you want me gone from your pictures, fine then. Quieter. Are you sure you still want me in your life? He laughs, dismissive, already impatient. He doesn't notice the shift, not yet, because under the fairy lights and the rented linens, something finally snaps. You see it clearly for the first time. They have taken everything you offered except your dignity. They never intended to give that back. So you decide to grant him exactly what he asked for. If your own son wants you erased from his wedding photos, you oblige. But he should pray he never learns how easy it is for a mother, the mother who made his entire life possible, to erase herself from his future. My name is Diane, and I am 62 years old. I have been a mother longer than I have been anything else. Longer than I was a wife. Longer than I was a nurse. My back hurts when the weather changes, and my hands crack in winter. I wear the same 2 pairs of jeans until this seems surrender. My pleasures are very small now, but they feel steady and honest. Hot coffee in a quiet house, a mystery book, my little vegetable garden. I grew up in a small Ohio town where neighbors watched each other's kids. My mother believed in 2 things, hard work and keeping your family together. I believed the same things, so I married young and tried my best. I thought loyalty and sacrifice would protect me from the worst kinds of heartbreak. I had 2 children, my son Jason and my daughter Emily. Their father left when Jason was 12 and Emily was 9. He met a younger woman from his office and moved 3 states away. Child support came late, when it came at all, and always with excuses. I worked double shifts at the hospital, took extra weekend calls, and juggled everything. There were nights when I fell asleep at the kitchen table over unpaid bills. I often ate toast so the kids could have chicken and vegetables instead. I told them we were fine, that things were tight but still okay. I smiled until my cheeks ached, even when my bank account trembled. Jason reminded me of his father, even as a boy, charming and restless. Teachers loved him, friends followed him, and he expected life to bend easily. When I said no to expensive sneakers, he said his dad would agree. When his father skipped another visit, Jason defended him and blamed my supposed attitude. I swallowed those little cuts because I wanted my son to feel loved. Emily saw through both of them, but Jason kept his father on a pedestal. I never badmouthed his father, even when lawyers threatened wage garnishments and liens. I just kept working, kept paying, kept showing up for every school event. The disrespect did not start as screaming or slammed doors. It started quietly. Jason forgot Mother's Day 3 years in a row, even after gentle reminders. He borrowed money for car repairs and never mentioned repayment afterward. He moved back home for 3 months and stayed almost 2 full years. I paid his phone bill because it is just until I catch up. He used my car without asking, left it with an empty gas tank. When I looked tired, he joked that I was being dramatic and overly sensitive. He called his father for fun things, sports tickets and vacations, never for responsibility. When his father finally remarried, Jason flew out for their big destination wedding. I watched on social media while holding a cup of cold coffee alone. The worst part was never the money. It was the dismissal. When I tried to set boundaries, Jason sighed and said I was guilt-tripping him. When I asked for help around the house, he said he was exhausted from work. I listened to him complain about his job while my knees throbbed from my shift. He would stand in the kitchen doorway, scrolling his phone, barely hearing my words. When my blood pressure spiked, he said everyone felt stressed sometimes and changed topics. Emily came by with groceries or flowers, but Jason always seemed busy or distracted. Slowly, piece by piece, I became a background prop in my own family. Then Jason met Lauren, and everything sharpened in a new direction. She was pretty and polished, from a family that vacationed in Aspen yearly. Her parents owned a small company and lived in a big house outside town. Lauren worked in marketing, carried designer bags, and ordered custom invitations from New York. The first time I met her, she was polite but faintly impatient with me. My old couch sagged, my curtains were outdated, my plates mismatched from years. I saw her eyes slide over my chipped mugs and thrift store dining chairs. She smiled and said my house felt very cozy in a careful, slightly strained voice. Over the next few years, Jason drifted further into her world. They spent holidays with her parents more often than with me. When they were here, Lauren complained about my neighborhood and the lack of good restaurants. She hinted that Jason deserved a lifestyle that matched his ambition and potential. I congratulated him on every small promotion, even as he still owed me money. When they got engaged, Jason told me over the phone instead of in person. He mentioned they had already celebrated the news with her family the previous weekend. I swallowed that little sting and congratulated him again, my voice steady but hollow. Still, I threw myself into helping because that is what mothers do. They wanted a beautiful outdoor ceremony at a vineyard an hour from my town. The venue was expensive, more than I spent on my first house down payment. Lauren's parents agreed to pay for the rehearsal dinner and her gown. Jason said he and Lauren would handle the rest with some help from both sides. 2 days later, he called and asked if I could help with the deposit. His voice was light, joking, like it was such a simple, harmless favor. He said they would lose their dream date unless someone stepped in quickly. I sat at my kitchen table with my checkbook and calculator. My retirement savings were not huge, but they were mine, hard-earned. I had a small cushion for emergencies, medical scares, the unknown future. I stared at the numbers until they blurred, then thought about my son. I thought about his baby cheeks, the nights with fevers, the school concerts. I thought about how my mother once skipped buying new shoes to pay our rent. Somehow that memory pushed my hand forward to write the check. I paid the entire deposit, nearly draining my emergency fund in one stroke. Jason hugged me and promised they would pay some of it back eventually. I smiled and said I was fine, and pretended the number did not terrify me. I kept quiet about it, never mentioning the exact amount to anyone. I even paid for the flowers later, again quietly because the budget kept swelling. When Lauren wanted custom centerpieces, Jason called me instead of asking her parents. He talked about how generous they already were, as though I was not equally strained. So I covered another invoice and another, always telling myself it was tradition. Others help with weddings. That is what people said whenever I hesitated. The dismissiveness grew along with the bills. I felt it in every planning conversation, like a low, constant hum. When I suggested using our family recipe for lemon bars at the dessert table, Lauren declined quickly. She said her guests expected more elegant options, like macarons and chocolate truffles. When I offered my old lace tablecloth from my grandmother, she said it was too yellowed. She preferred clean, modern white instead, ordered from a boutique rental company. I nodded and said I understood, even while something inside me folded tighter. At one family dinner, Emily asked who was paying for what exactly. The room fell strangely quiet, and Jason changed the subject to honeymoon plans. Later, Emily pulled me aside in the kitchen and studied my face. Her eyes narrowed when I shrugged and said everything was taken care of already. She knew me too well, knew my tells, knew my avoidance. I changed the topic to her new job and brushed away her questions gently. I did not want to sound resentful or like I demanded credit for helping. The inciting incident, the breaking point, did not arrive as a scream. It arrived as a spreadsheet and a passing comment that sliced straight through me. A week before the wedding, I stopped by Jason's house with a casserole. They were sitting at the kitchen island with Lauren's laptop open between them. Guest lists, seating charts, vendor balances, everything neatly color-coded and labeled. Lauren flipped the screen to show me their wedding budget overview with a satisfied smile. Under contributions, it listed her parents, venue and dress, his dad, bar package upgrade. Next line, our savings, photography, decor, honeymoon fund. There was no line for me anywhere on that screen. I stared at the word his dad next to a dollar amount that confused me. Jason's father had sent a check, apparently, for an open bar upgrade. Meanwhile, my payments had simply been absorbed as though they appeared by magic. Lauren chirped about how supportive everyone had been, especially Jason's father and stepmother. She said it proved how much they believed in the marriage and wanted them happy. I felt my mouth go dry, my ears ringing like a high-pitched whine. Jason glanced at me, then back at the laptop and thanked his father again out loud. I said quietly, I thought I paid the venue deposit. Jason replied without looking up, said yes, but that was handled months ago already. He said they had decided not to track every little thing because it felt awkward. Every little thing. That deposit had been almost my entire emergency savings, not a little thing. I felt something inside my chest tear like old fabric. I asked, so you just did not include me at all? Lauren laughed lightly and said, Diane, you know you always help. You were just being a mom. She said it like my sacrifice was air, invisible and automatic, nothing worth mentioning. That was when the humiliation settled into something deeper and more dangerous. It was not just about money. It was about who counted and who did not. I realized that in their story, I was the background extra, not the core family. Later that night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I stared at my bank app. The numbers were brutally clear, the reality plain, the imbalance undeniable. I thought about the new suit I had bought for Jason's father. I remembered watching his big destination wedding online while working an overtime shift. Rage and grief braided together until my hands trembled around my tea mug. That night became my own private turning point, my breaking point. The phrase Jason used about every little thing would not leave my mind. Every little thing was every long shift, every bill, every fevered night. Every little thing was my entire life bent around his comfort and dreams. I realized that I had never really asked for respect. I had begged silently. I had hoped they would just notice on their own and honor my efforts. That hope had kept me quiet, and my quiet had turned into permission. They had built an entire narrative where I barely registered as a pillar. So I made a plan, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Started simple, with a folder of emails and receipts on my computer. I gathered every invoice with my name on it, every cleared check, every confirmation. The venue contract was in my name because they needed a homeowner cosigner. I had almost forgotten that detail, signing quickly while Jason rushed me at the office. The florist contract was also under my name, because I paid the initial deposit myself. The photographer agreement, however, was under Jason and Lauren, so that piece stayed untouched. I made an appointment with the venue coordinator 2 days before the wedding. I told her I wanted to review the account and confirm final payments. She pulled everything up, cheerful and professional, and walked me through each line. There was still a remaining balance for the upgraded menu and bar package. Jason had assumed his father's additional check would cover that before the event. The coordinator explained that whoever signed the contract remained legally responsible for unpaid balances. My name stared back at me from the signature line like a cautionary ghost. I took a deep breath and asked what my options were legally. Could I adjust the package back to the original level I had funded? Could I remove extras that Jason and Lauren had added without consulting me? The coordinator looked surprised, then thoughtful, and said yes, within certain deadlines. We were still within that window by less than 24 hours. I sat there, hands wrapped around my purse strap, and weighed my choices carefully. I could either stay silent and risk future debt, or realign things properly and fairly. The coordinator assured me she would follow whatever instructions I gave as the primary client. I did not want to ruin their wedding despite my hurt and anger. I did not want guests going hungry or furious, or chaos spilling everywhere. I wanted something more precise, more controlled, something that reflected reality and boundaries. So I decided I would leave only what I had already personally paid. I signed a form reverting the package to the base level I funded alone. The open bar upgrade from Jason's father stayed because that check already cleared. The extra late-night snacks and fancy cocktail hour stations were removed from the plan. Those were items Jason and Lauren had added, assuming someone else would absorb the cost. I asked if any references to complimentary from venue could be clarified on invoices. The coordinator agreed to clearly itemize which payments came from which parties afterward. I thanked her and left feeling strangely calm and more anchored than before. I was not sabotaging their day. I was simply refusing to sponsor their entitlement. That was the first part of my plan, the financial boundary. The second part would happen on the wedding day during those photographs. The morning of the wedding arrived warm and bright, with birds calling outside. I curled my hair carefully, did my makeup with slow, steady hands. My dress was simple, navy blue with a gentle shimmer and modest neckline. I pinned on the small silver brooch my mother had worn at my own wedding. As I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. There was grief, yes, but there was also a thin line of steel. I whispered to my reflection, "No more begging for a place at their table at the venue." Everything looked beautiful, even scaled back from earlier plans. White chairs glowed against the green grass, flowers lined the aisle gracefully. Guests laughed, servers carried trays of champagne, soft music floated from hidden speakers. Jason looked handsome in his suit, Lauren radiant in her lace gown. They hugged me, briefly, then hurried away to greet others and direct vendors. I took my seat quietly, feeling a curious peace under my nervousness. The ceremony itself was lovely, short and sweet, filled with cliché but heartfelt vows. During the cocktail hour, the photographer started gathering family for formal portraits. I watched from a distance as Jason's father and stepmother stepped into frame. The photographer called for parents of the groom, and they walked forward confidently. I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress, and approached with a polite smile. Lauren glanced at me, then at Jason, something tight flashing across her face. Jason cleared his throat and walked toward me, looking slightly uncomfortable already. He said, "Mom, we actually talked about keeping the photos simple. Core family." I asked calmly, "And what exactly am I, if not core family?" He shifted, glanced at Lauren, then said it would just be cleaner visually. He mentioned blended family dynamics and how his father's wife needed to feel included. I realized then that he truly believed I would quietly accept being moved aside. For them, I was the permanent understudy, never the main character on any stage. My chest burned, but my voice stayed even, almost gentle. Said Jason, "You are asking your mother to step out of your family portraits." He rolled his eyes slightly and said, "I was making a scene unnecessarily." Guests glanced over, sensing tension, though the photographer tried to stay professional. Lauren pursed her lips and said, "Diane, we can do some photos with you later." The later hung in the air like a lie, flimsy and clearly disposable. That sentence became the match to my carefully stacked kindling. The years of being later, afterthought backup, floated to the surface. I thought about the spreadsheet without my name, the invisible deposits, the erasure. I thought about all the nights I ate toast so Jason could have better dinners. The final insult was not the request to step out, but the expectation. The assumption that I would swallow it like I always had without visible anger. Something in me clicked into place, and the sadness hardened into resolve. I took a small step back, away from the camera line. My smile felt oddly light, like I had just set down a heavy box. I said clearly for both of them to hear, "You know what? You are right." Jason looked surprised, then relieved, as though convinced he had won quickly. I continued, "I will step out of the photos and out of this story." His brow furrowed slightly at the last part, but he stayed silent. Then I added, "I already spoke with the venue about the account." By the way, his shoulders stiffened just enough for me to notice. But that was only the beginning. That sentence did not come from my mouth then, but it echoed inside. I asked Jason to walk with me a few steps away from everyone. Lauren tried to follow, but I held up my hand gently and stopped her. I said I needed a private word with my son, and she hesitated. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain, facing me without backup. We stood near a cluster of trees, just far enough for privacy. I told him about the contracts, the signatures, the recent visit to the coordinator. I explained that I had reverted the wedding package to align with my actual contribution. His eyes widened as he realized certain luxuries were no longer guaranteed. I told him calmly that I would not assume debt for decisions I never made. I mentioned his father's check covering the open bar upgrade, giving that proper acknowledgement. I did not raise my voice once, but each word felt like a stone placed carefully. Jason sputtered, said I could not just change everything at the last minute. He said guests expected certain things and that I was embarrassing him unnecessarily. I replied that guests would still be fed well and drinks would still be served. The only things removed were extras that someone else needed to fund. I told him I would not be his invisible sponsor anymore, emotionally or financially. His face turned red and he accused me of revenge and pettiness. I stood still and let those words float past without grabbing them. Then came the ugliest part, the words that finally burned away any remaining illusion. Jason said if you wanted credit so badly, you should have just said, as though I had asked for a plaque or a speech instead of basic respect. As though my pain centered on recognition rather than constant erasure and entitlement. That was when I understood how far apart our realities had drifted. He truly did not see me as a person with limits and needs. I was just the mother, the background worker, the quiet fixer of problems. I decided that if I was being written out of his pictures, I would direct my own exit. I walked back with him to the group, my heart oddly steady. The photographer called again for parents of the groom and everyone rearranged. I looked at Jason's father and his wife, both dressed elegantly, smiling confidently. Then I did something I never imagined I would have the strength to do. I stepped aside intentionally, not in shame, but in clear, deliberate choice. When the photographer raised her camera, I lifted my hand politely. I said, "Please go ahead and take pictures with the family you prefer." A few heads turned quickly, sensing something not quite right in my tone. I continued, louder this time. "I will not be in any staged photos today." Lauren looked irritated. Jason looked panicked. Guests looked confused and uncomfortable. I smiled and added, "It seems I am not considered part of that picture anyway." What happened next stunned me. Jason grabbed my elbow, whispering that I was ruining his wedding day. The same boy who once clung to my hand at school, drop off. The same boy whose science fair projects I stayed up all night finishing. He accused me of being selfish, dramatic, and jealous of his stepmother. The words cut, but also revealed exactly how he saw me now. A burden, not a blessing, a problem, not a parent. I gently pulled my arm free and spoke loudly enough for nearby relatives. I said, selfish would have been keeping my savings instead of funding this venue. Conversations around us fell quiet, people turning to listen with polite discomfort. I did not list amounts, but I described sacrifices in broad, undeniable strokes. I mentioned working double shifts, skipping doctor appointments, living on tight basics to help. I kept my tone level, almost story-like, not raging, not sobbing, just truthful. Then she did something I never expected. Jason's stepmother stepped forward, eyes wide, face pale beneath her makeup. She asked carefully, "Diane, what exactly did you pay for?" Her voice shook slightly, revealing that even she had been fed a different story. I answered clearly, "The deposit on this venue. the floral arrangements, and several other invoices. I added that my name was on the contracts, which I had recently reviewed. A ripple moved through the crowd as people processed those implications silently. Jason's father looked at him sharply and asked, "Why did you not tell us this?" Jason floundered, said it was complicated, that everyone had helped in different ways. I realized then that he had been playing both sides for attention and applause, telling his father he carried most of the weight, telling me I was essential, yet invisible publicly. My stomach twisted, but my spine straightened, because the pattern finally stood fully exposed. I had spent years feeling crazy for sensing this manipulation reflected in small moments. The venue coordinator approached discreetly, sensing tension that might spill into her responsibility zone. I pulled her slightly aside and confirmed that everything we had arranged still stood. She nodded and said the event could proceed smoothly under the revised plan. Jason stared between us, realizing he had lost control of the narrative and the finances. I turned back to him and spoke quietly, though everyone nearby could hear clearly. I said, "You asked me to step out of your photos, Jason. I am simply honoring your wishes more completely than you expected." He begged then, in his own way, demanding that I stay and smile. He said we could sort everything out later, that I was overreacting about wording. He promised to do extra photos with me, post them on social media. His solution to decades of erasure was a curated gallery for public consumption. I felt a sadness so deep it almost folded me in half. Then, underneath that sadness, I felt something else, something fierce and calm. I told him, "Pictures are snapshots of truth. Jason, this is your truth today. You chose which parents to highlight, sacrifices to acknowledge, which ones to erase." I said, "One day, you may look at these photos and feel a hollow space. You will wonder why your mother is not standing beside you in them. When that happens, remember that you asked me to step aside." Then I did the one thing that turned my quiet boundary into undeniable consequence. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a printed copy of the venue adjustment form with my signature. I handed it to Jason and said, "Going forward, you are financially responsible for any upgrades. I will no longer co-sign, cover surprise invoices, or rescue you from your own choices." His fingers shook as he took the paper, his eyes scanning the text quickly. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw anything. I simply looked at my son and said, "I love you, but I am done being invisible. I will not fund my own erasure anymore." Then I walked over to Emily, who had watched everything with brimming eyes. She reached for my hand and squeezed it so hard it almost hurt. She whispered that she was proud of me, that someone finally said the truth. I told her I needed to go home, that I could not stay and pretend anymore. We walked quietly toward the parking lot while guests murmured behind us. Some looked uncomfortable, some sympathetic, some curious and gossip-hungry. I could feel their eyes on my back, but my shoulders felt strangely lighter. Emily offered to drive me, but I insisted on going alone to clear my thoughts. I hugged her, thanked her for always seeing me, always honoring my efforts. Then I got into my car, closed the door, and let out one long breath. On the drive home, my phone buzzed repeatedly in the cup holder. Messages from Jason, from relatives, from a couple of concerned friends poured in. I did not answer any of them during that drive. I let them wait. I turned off the car radio and drove in silence, feeling each mile unwind tension. I thought about my mother again, about the quiet strength she carried through hard years. I wondered what she would have said about a grandson who treated me like this. By the time I reached my driveway, the sun had dipped lower and softer. My modest house looked small but deeply mine, filled with memories and resilience. I walked inside, slipped off my shoes, and stood in the quiet hallway. Then the tears finally came, heavy and hot, dripping onto the worn hardwood floor. I cried for the little boy Jason once was, who trusted me completely. I cried for the woman I had been, who believed endless sacrifice would eventually be appreciated. I cried for every mother who fated herself to keep peace and hold families together. In the following days, the storm fully arrived. Jason sent long texts about embarrassment, about guests asking questions, about damage control. He alternated between anger and guilt, between blame and half-hearted apologies. He never once explicitly acknowledged asking me to step out of the photos. He referred instead to misunderstandings and heightened emotions, as though I had imagined the words. Lauren wrote once, saying she was sorry if I felt hurt, but also criticized my timing. She said this could have been handled quietly, privately, not in front of everyone. Emily came over with groceries again, and we sat at my table together. She said plainly that she had heard Jason's exact words about the photos. She said she had watched my face when he dismissed my contributions in front of Lauren. She said with shaking fury that she would not accept anyone rewriting that reality. Her validation felt like someone finally standing next to me in the battlefield. For the first time in years, I did not feel completely alone in this family. Jason eventually asked to meet in person, and I agreed with clear conditions. We met at a coffee shop, neutral ground, not my home, not his. I told him before he even sat down that we would discuss boundaries, not rehash drama. He tried jokes at first, tried lightness, tried to minimize the situation. Then he realized my expression was not budging, not softening, not bailing him out emotionally. The mask slipped, and he finally said, "I just wanted things to look perfect." I answered, "You wanted things to look perfect, even if that meant erasing the imperfect people who got you there." I told him that wanting aesthetic symmetry did not excuse disrespect or entitlement. I explained that photographs last decades, and he had chosen a story without me. I said, "You wanted me out of your wedding photos?" So I stepped out. Now I am also stepping out of this pattern where you use me. I told him I would not cut him out completely, but I would step way back. The new boundaries were simple and non-negotiable. No more financial bailouts, no more secret deposits, no more emergency checks. No more last-minute emotional dumping calls without basic respect or reciprocity. Respectful communication only, acknowledgement of past harm, and effort to repair would be required. He listened, defensive at first, then increasingly quiet as the words sank in. Whether he truly absorbed them or only pretended remained to be seen. Still, speaking them out loud restored something inside me that had been dormant. Over time, my life became surprisingly peaceful, even with the lingering ache. I started using my evenings for myself instead of waiting by the phone. I joined a small book club at the library and met women my age. We traded stories about adult children, aging parents, marriages, divorces, and second chances. I spent more time in my garden, hands in the soil, watching things grow slowly. I scheduled long postponed doctor visits, updated my will, reviewed my retirement situation honestly. I also made a quiet decision about my legacy. The heirlooms I had planned to divide equally now had a different path. The photo albums I painstakingly kept, the recipes, the jewelry from my mother. I listed them for Emily and for my granddaughter, who always rushed to hug me. I chose to leave Jason something smaller, still kind, but no longer the majority. It's not as punishment, but as a reflection of who truly showed up in my life. Actions have consequences, even for our children, especially for our children sometimes. Months later, Jason sent me a framed photo from the wedding, showed him and Lauren with his father and stepmother all smiling. There was a small, empty space at one edge of the frame, slightly awkward. He included a note that said he wished I had been in the picture. I stood there holding that frame, feeling a curious mix of sorrow and peace. He wanted the comfort of my presence without the inconvenience of my boundaries. I did not respond immediately, because some lessons take longer than a simple reply. I placed the frame on a shelf, not too visible, not entirely hidden. It reminded me that I had finally chosen myself after decades of erasing. That photograph was his story from that day, missing a central person by his choice. My story from that day looked different, beginning with a painful request and ending with freedom. I still love my son, but I love myself now with equal weight. That has changed everything about how I move through this final stretch of my life. If there is any lesson in all this, it is simple but hard. Mothers are not endless wells. We are people with hearts, limits, and histories. Love does not mean allowing your own child to erase you from their narrative. Sacrifice without respect is not noble. It slowly destroys the one who keeps giving. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are the only way peace can finally breathe. Sometimes choosing yourself looks like stepping out of a photograph and into your own life. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is calm, quiet, and rooted in self-worth. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done in this situation? And do not forget to subscribe to Golden Years Diary for more stories like this.